I think it's supposed to ease off. Yeah, tonight it is.
Oh my gosh, I had to go to
So,
way out in Brooklyn.
well, it should be over by then, they said. So,
In the morning, it was about midnight.
Mark chapter 16, last chapter 15. Jesus died. He was on the cross and he died. And Joseph of Arimathea took him and gave him in the tomb, gave him his tomb, and he was buried. So we start off at verse 1 in chapter 16. Now when the Sabbath was past, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome, or Salome, if you'll say it that way, brought spices that they might come and anoint him. Very early in the morning, on the first day of the week, they came to the tomb when the sun had risen. And they said among themselves, who will roll away the stone from the door of the tomb for us? But when they looked up, they saw that the stone had been rolled away, for it was very large. And entering the tomb, they saw a young man clothed in a long white robe, sitting on the right side. And they were alarmed. But he said unto them, do not be alarmed. You seek Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. He is risen. He is not here. See the place where he lay, where they laid him. Okay? So it's almost the same ladies, not quite the same ladies that was with Jesus when they buried him, but it's three of them are the same. Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, which we talked about last week, is the same as James the Less, all right, and Salome, which was James and John, the two apostles, their mother was there. And we also thought that this second Mary wasn't the Mary of Jesus, wasn't his mother, but this Mary, the mother of James, could have been a sister to Mary. We don't know, or a relation, we'll say it that way, a relationship. A lot of times in the Hebrew Bible, in the words, they kind of rely upon more relation. They may say son when they mean grandson, or they mean something else like that. They're a relation to them. So, but these three ladies were coming to bring the spices. Now, normally they would have brought, and they did bring some. They bought the myrrh and the oil, but they didn't bring much of the spices. There just wasn't enough time for them to go get it after the crucifixion and before the Sabbath started, which is that evening. And by that time, it was late in the day. It was the 9th hour when Jesus gave up to go. So it took him a little bit longer probably to get, Joseph had to go to Pilate, get the authority to okay it, and then come back, okay, and take the body down and have him taken away. So it says in there, when the Sabbath was past. Now, it was Friday night. When Friday night starts, at evening, at sundown, that started the Sabbath. So the end of the Sabbath was that next Saturday evening. Now it says when the Sabbath was past. Well, it was dark. They couldn't do anything then. So they came back the next day. The next day is Sunday, the first day of the week, okay, for us.
Yeah. was Saturday their first day?
Saturday was their Sabbath, okay? Friday night to Saturday night. Whether it's their first day or not, I don't think so, because, again, God rested on the Sabbath, all right? That's what they are all saying about. So that was their seventh day. So Sunday would have been their first day of the week, too, because it started that way. They brought the spices, and they didn't use it for mummification, but they brought it for smell. They brought it there to try to cover up some of the decaying of the bodies, okay? But they had a quandary. Why? Who's going to roll the stone away for it? There's three women here, and they had no way in the world to roll. You know how big those stones are? They're big. Yeah, they're probably as wide as you could reach across. and maybe even more.
They're probably taller than yours.
And they're probably about that thick.
Yeah.
And what they do, there's a trough in front of that when they dig the burial chamber, they dig a burial trough along with it. That stone goes in that trough and it rolls, okay? It's like a bowling ball, okay, when it goes down. So it rolls into place and it locks it kind of. I mean, it's stuck there. And it takes great effort because you have to roll it and you're rolling it up, back up that hill a little bit. Yeah, no, it's very heavy.
I can imagine like 8 feet wide, 8 feet round, 8 feet tall, you know.
Yeah, it has to cover probably not that tall, but it's a big boulder. They actually had one at the garden that we went to down from it. Okay, it wasn't right there in front of it. They said the original one was lost a long time ago because people came along and they started chipping pieces off of it to take it back. It's just gone. It's what they think. But they did have one that was like it on down just, a few hundred feet or a few feet away from it that showed kind of like it. So the stone, when they came upon it, the stone was already rolled away. So they didn't have to worry about that now. But when they looked in, it was still early morning, and they're looking in there and doesn't have any light in it. So it's dark. And they see this person sitting there. And they said they entered the tomb, and when you enter it, they don't make the doors all the way where you walk in. You dip down and get in it, and then you can stand up just for a little bit. So they had to dip down, and when they raised up, there's a guy there. And it's like, ooh, scary. Yeah, don't know what's going on. In this scripture, it says a young man. In other parts of the Gospels, the other Gospels, it says an angel. In another part of the Gospel, there were 2 of them.
But that's how we learned was the angel, wasn't it? That's what at Christmas time, we learned it was an angel.
Mm-hmm. And here again, it says he was with a long white robe. Again, to go back, Mark was not a eyewitness. All right? Matthew was, and John was, the 2 apostles. Mark and Luke were not eyewitnesses to Jesus. Now, they may have seen Jesus. Okay, we pretty much know a little later on, John Mark, we talked about that when Jesus got rescued. The kid that ran off and lost his clothes was probably John Mark. The house that they were staying in the upper room, was probably John Mark's house. Okay, so he probably tagged along after they went to go from the upper room when they had the Last Supper till we went out to the garden. John Mark probably went with them. Was trying, may not have been, he's tagging along for whatever reason. So he may have seen some things, but yet most of the time he wasn't there. Peter is the one that was relaying back to Mark about what was going on. Mark was questioning him about these things, and he wrote it down for Peter. Okay? So he identified himself that as far as, he didn't say who he was, but he said, don't be alarmed. He said, do not be alarmed. You seek Jesus of Nazareth. Had to specify him who was crucified. He's not here. He's risen. He's gone. See the place where they laid him. So, immediately if you see somebody and Jesus is gone, they look in and see there wasn't nobody there. It's like, where'd you take him? Where's he at? But he's telling them they're not there anymore. It says the women saw the angel in a human form who told them of the resurrected Jesus and showed them the empty tomb. And then he painted the contrast between what Jesus was and what he is. He was crucified beyond all doubt. He died, but now he's risen. Okay? Now, a lot of people will go back and forth in this. There's 2 things. When you're risen, okay, when you die and you're brought back to life, what do they call that? Resuscitated. They do the, compressions on you and everything. People die all the time. They die for a few minutes, no heartbeat, no nothing, and then they can resuscitate them. They didn't resuscitate Jesus. Jesus had a new body. It still was the same body they saw. If you go back and read the other Gospels, he tells Mary Magdalene that sees him in the garden after this, don't touch him, because he hadn't yet gone back to the Father. He had risen, but he hadn't gone back yet. But in this particular case, he didn't tell this one. Like I said, Mark didn't write this down. But he was resurrected. So there's several people in the Bible that was resuscitated. We know Lazarus was, Elijah, the widow son in Elijah's day. Elijah laid on him and he came back to life, but eventually they died again. Lazarus died, the widow's son died, Jairus' daughter eventually died. All of those that was raised from the dead or resuscitated, they eventually died. Jesus didn't. That's what resurrection, that's the difference between resurrection and resuscitation. So he identifies him again, like we said, Jesus of Nazareth, who was crucified. These weren't titles, okay? It says it wasn't proud to be crucifixion, because it said whoever was crucified on the tree is dishonored. It's shameful. It said for the description of his shame has become his crown of glory for Paul and all who look to the crucified and risen Savior and Lord. That's who they're looking for. It says, see the place where they laid him. The actual event of Jesus' resurrection, we don't know what happened. Nowhere is it described. But its discovery of it is recorded in some detail here, and then in the other Gospels it's recorded. So the women was intending to give Jesus' body a more proper burial, because they hadn't had time before they had to close the door of it. Said when they see the place where Jesus lay, it's now empty. We see that the Father didn't forsake Jesus. Okay? When we see the place where they laid him, it's now empty. We see that death didn't conquer him. When we see the place that they laid him, it's now empty. We see that we have a living friend in Jesus. And then the last portion is he is risen. That's what it tells us again. It says the fact of Jesus' resurrection is a matter of history. What it means can only be understood by what the Bible tells us. Therefore, it is important to consider what the empty tomb of Jesus and his resurrection means. The resurrection means that Jesus was declared to be the Son of God with power according to the Spirit of holiness by the resurrection of the dead. That's what Paul tells us in Romans. Also, Thessalonians says resurrection, we have assurance of our own resurrection. It says in Thessalonians 4:14, if we believe that Jesus died and rose again, even so God will bring with him those who sleep in Jesus. Resurrection means that God has an eternal plan for these bodies of ours. There was nothing in the teaching of Jesus approaching the Gnostic heresy, declaring that the flesh is inherently evil. Plato could only get rid of sin by getting rid of the body. Jesus retains the body and declares that God feeds the body as well as the soul. That the body is a sacred thing as the soul, since the soul makes it its sanctuary. Okay. Brother Epson, 7 and 8. There in Mark 7 and 8.
But go, tell his disciples and Peter that he is going before you into Galilee. And there you will see him, and he said to you. So they went out quickly and fled from the tomb, for they trembled and were amazed, and they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid.
Okay. Here, the angel is telling them, the young man is telling them Go tell his disciples. And who? And Peter. Why did he bring Peter out? He's one of his disciples, so why didn't he just say, go tell the disciples? Peter was distraught because he had denied Christ 3 times. And so he was having a bad night, very bad night. So the angel reached out. He knew that Peter needed his comfort. Told him, go tell his disciples and Peter, okay, to meet me in Galilee. So they went out quickly and fled from the tomb, for they trembled and were amazed. I can just imagine, I mean, how in the world that something like that happened. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. They didn't know, first of all, that they thought that if they knew, they'd be accused of taking the body. You know, where's the body? Well, it wasn't there. There was nothing there. The body wasn't there. It doesn't fill in other places. It tells us, like I said earlier, that as they left, Mary Magdalene evidently stayed behind a little bit, and she had an encounter with Jesus there. She thought he was the gardener, as a matter of fact. But that's not so much, it's not brought out here. You have to read each one of the stories to get the complete story of what happened. It says, this shows us that when Jesus invites us, he always remembers his promise, as he said to you. That's what the angel told them. Because he was going to be meeting them. He told them, I'll have a place for you. I'll go back to Galilee and be there with you. And then we talked about Peter being called out, especially for them. It says, for they trembled and were amazed. These women left the tomb and fled, seized with trembling and astonishment. The actual Greek word is ecstasy. Seized and trembling and ecstasy, filled with fear, so they fled. They were so excited. They was the fear, but it's a good fear. Okay? They were excited about that Jesus, it's happened. It's just like it starts falling into place for them. Okay? Especially after he appears to Mary, and Mary tells the people that he's tells the disciples that he's risen. It says this does not mean that they made no report of the resurrection, because we know that they did. Mark 16 and 11 and Luke 24 and 9 tells us that. It means that as they left the scene of the empty tomb, they didn't talk about it among themselves. They didn't try to figure it out or match their stories. They simply went to make a report to the disciples as the angels invited them to. Okay, if you want to read the next page, almost 2 pages, you can. I'm not going to go over it tonight, but just to say that some of the people don't believe the verses 9 through 20 was in the original Gospels. Well, I can tell you we don't have an original Gospel, okay? So, but what we do know, these people, and they list them down here, these 3, Pappus, Justin Martyr, and Irenaeus, both quoted from these scriptures, 16:9 through 20. So, and these were the early 100 AD, Papias, he's reporting it, and some of the others, they report it, and that was early on. So because we don't have it, doesn't mean it isn't there. They think maybe somebody is what they're saying if you read through this.
They can't prove anyone rich.
No, but it's lost. It was on papyrus, okay, which is paper that they made together with the reeds, okay, and it likely falls apart and everything. They had to very carefully unroll those Dead Sea Scrolls to get them out. One of the Dead Sea Scrolls that they had is called the Copper Scroll. It's copper, that's rolled up.
Wow.
Okay? Undo copper. What happens when you undo copper after 1,000 years? Yeah, it starts cracking and everything.
Right, yeah.
They had to, I'd say Xerox it, but they didn't Xerox it. They X-rayed it to see what was on it before they attempted to start opening, is what I understood. So it's pretty interesting how they did that.
Paper also makes me think of onion paper.
Well, exactly. It would be exactly like that. They couldn't go down to Walmart and buy the paper we had, you know. They had to use what they had, which was they made their own paper, and it was very expensive. So.
Well, just look at some of the books we've had that's 100 years old.
Yeah. Yeah, you open it up. I've got my great grandfather's New Testament. Okay, and it's pretty fragile. I mean, you open it up very carefully, and you don't move it too much because I mean it's got to be 100 plus years old. 100. He was born in 1860. Yeah, something like that. So.
Because you don't touch it.
Anyway, we're going to jump down to the bottom of page 7, verse 9 to 11. Would you read that for us, Iris?
Now when he rose early on the first day of the week, he appeared first to Mary Magdalene, out of whom he had cast 7 demons. She went and told those who had been with him, as they mourned and wept. And when they heard that he was alive and had been seen by her, they did not believe.
Okay, so we get an abbreviated story on Mary here. It doesn't tell us where, doesn't tell us anything. Like I said, some of the other Gospels tells us more details about it, but Mark just sets it apart that she was the first one to tell him that she saw him. They didn't believe her. Oh, you gotta be kidding. There's no way. You know, after the other 2 ladies had already told you, well, hey, there wasn't anybody in that tomb. It was gone. And the angel told us to go do this. Well, now Mary Magdalene's telling them, you know, hey, I saw him. So, you know. Okay, 12 and 13. Bertha?
Oh, after that he appeared in another form to 2 of them as they walked and went into the country. And they went and told it to the rest, but they did not believe them either.
Okay, here again, this is a brief detail on another gospel. It tells us this was on the way to Emmaus, all right, where the 2 disciples, Cleopas, and it doesn't tell us who the other one was, but they walked with Jesus, and they didn't know who he was, and he's, you know, he come up to them and asked, what are you talking about? And they said, oh, haven't you heard, you know, that Jesus died, this man Jesus died, and he was such a great teacher, and went into all the details. And Jesus began to expound upon himself to them. And they went to Emmaus, which is a couple of hours walk from Jerusalem, I think it was, 1.5 hours, 2 hours. They got there, and then Jesus disappeared. And they had to go all the way back to Jerusalem, another couple of hours back, to tell the disciples, hey, he's here, we saw him, you know. They're not just telling a story. Now they went back, and it said, go tell the disciples. The disciples had probably gone back to the upper room. That's probably where they were meeting at that time. And it may not just been the 12. It may have been 70, may have been more. We don't know how many people of the disciples were there. So, but as these disciples knew, these 2, they came back and they told the other disciples. So they're starting to get confirmation in the same day, all right, that it happened. So they're just, okay, whatever. Then, later on, they get up there to Galilee. Let's kind of skip a little bit, and it goes down to 14 through 18. Later he appeared to the 11 as they sat at the table, and he rebuked their unbelief and hardness of heart, because they did not believe those who had seen him after he had risen. And he said to them, go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. He who believes and is baptized will be saved, but he who does not believe will be condemned. And these signs will follow those who will believe. In my name they will cast out demons. They will speak with new tongues. They will take up serpents, and if they drink anything deadly, it will by no means hurt them. They will lay hands on the sick, and they will recover. Okay? So this is what he's talking to them about, what he preaches to the 11 that was still there, because at that time Judas had already gone and hung himself. So there was only the 11 part of the disciples there. Now, there, like I said, there may have been other people there too. We know the ladies was there, some of the ladies, some of the others. So this is a great commission. This is one of the things that it builds it down. Mark really, cuts it down to the chase here at the end. And he tells us, here's the message of Jesus. Go into all the world and preach the gospel. So that's what Jesus was trying to tell the disciples the whole time he was there. Go out there and preach and teach to them. It says this was a command. It wasn't a suggestion. Interest in missions is not an elective in God's University of Grace. It is something in which every disciple is expected to major in. So missions is a way to get people. That's a way to tell the people, to tell them what's going on, how good God has been to us, and what he can do for them if they will just let him. The idea of a faith that should go into all the world wasn't part of the Jewish thinking, was it? They were astounded back there when Jesus was telling them and teaching them, and he told them in the latter days, the Gentile people was going to come down and sit with them with the dinner, just like at Passover. And they were just, they couldn't believe that. Why in the world would Gentiles want to do that? It's Jewish, it's our heritage. They didn't die, they didn't suffer, they didn't do all this for the Passover. And Jesus tried to tell them, no, they don't have to. Okay? It's very brief, but people sometimes they miss over that. They jump over it.
There were times he said things to them they never commented.
No, it didn't until later. Like I said, it finally kicked in. Little story is an army chaplain once said to the Duke of Wellington, do you think that it is of any use taking the gospel to the hill tribes of India? Will they ever receive it? The Duke replied, what are your marching orders? That was the only answer he gave. Stern disciplinarian as that great soldier was, he only wanted marching orders. And he obeyed. He meant that every soldier of the cross must obey the marching orders of Christ, his great commander. That's what Charles Spurgeon said. That's why they call it the Great Commission. Okay? We have to go out to all the world. It says a superficial reading of Mark 16, 15 through 16 would suggest that sinners must be baptized to be saved. That's where a lot of people get messed up. It says, but this misinterpretation disappears when you note the emphasis is on believing. If a person does not believe, he is condemned, even if he has been baptized. You're just a wet sinner. That's all it is. The omission of baptized with disbelief would seem to show that Jesus does not make baptism essential to salvation. And that's true. The condemnation rests on disbelief, not on baptism. The thief beside him, he told him, this day you'll be with me in paradise. They didn't baptize him. He was on the cross. It just didn't happen. And then it says at the very end of that, and these signs will follow those believers. Jesus gave his disciples a promise of divine power and protection. The promise is to be understood in the context of the dangers inherent in the worldwide spread of the gospel. As Paul was bitten by a snake and preserved on the island of Malta, Jesus never intended to drink poison, or I'll say handle snakes. Throw that in there just to be there. It's just when you go out to do what Jesus has told you to do, sometimes things are going to happen. And he's going to give you that ability to live through that. 19 through 20, Brother Epson.
So then after the Lord had spoken to them, he was received up into heaven and sat down at the right hand of God. And they went out and preached everywhere, the Lord working with them and confirming the word through the accompanying signs.
Okay. Here again, very brief. We skip a lot of days. It was 40 days after Christ was resurrected till he lifted up. We see in Corinthians 500 people, at least 500 people at one time saw him. The disciples saw him several other times in between. So there's a lot of time that says that so then after the Lord spoke to him, he was received up into heaven. Goes back and later on in the Gospels and in Acts, it tells us more about this, his being caught up into heaven, all right? But this little piece is showing that he's wrapping his book up, Mark is. And they went out and preached everywhere. That's the whole book of Acts. And then that's the rest of the New Testament, except Revelation. The stories, Pauline stories, then James and Jude, all the other, Peter, those telling their stories of what happened, their letters that they wrote to the churches on that. It says they went out and preached everywhere. This means that they didn't remain together to bless each other. They went out. The followers of Jesus should come together, but they come together to properly equip them to go out and touch a needy world. Spurgeon again said, I do not want you all to feel that it is not the end, though it may be the beginning of Christian life to come and hear sermons. Scatter as widely as ever you can the blessing which you get for yourself. The moment you find the light and realize that the world is in the dark, run away with your match and lend somebody else a light. Okay? That was Charles Spurgeon. And that ends the book of Mark for us.
Thank you, kind sir.
It's a short lesson compared to the ones that we had before. So.
Ruby says she's looking forward to the movie of David's house.
Oh, good. Good. Well, we'll start it next week. Tell her. Appreciate everybody.